Maybe it's not me.
Alrighty, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good evening and welcome to our virtual event. Thank you for taking time to join us tonight. My name is Taylor Pennywell, and I'm the co-founder of Redbud Resource Group, a Santa Rosa-based nonprofit working to increase the visibility of Native California through history, science, and public health curriculums. I'm also a member of the Time Maidu Nation and co-chair of the Rights of Mother Earth Task Force in Sonoma County. As we all know, there are several major wildfires happening right now throughout California, including one in Western Sonoma County, where we are currently located. Many of us are anxious, uncomfortable, and frankly, tired of moving through fire season year after year with great uncertainty. While I'm no expert in fire, climate change, or natural disasters, I do know that addressing fear and anxiety through education can inspire adaptability. It's my hope today that many of us wondering what tonight, tomorrow, or any year in the future will look like in California.
Okay.
Sorry, I got muted. But my hope is that tonight you leave the event with clarity and, maybe a new inspired vision for what the future of California and our relationship with fire can look like. And with that, I would like to introduce Stephanie Beard, Communication Specialist at Pepperwood Preserve in Santa Rosa, California. Stephanie is also co-chair of the Rights of Mother Earth Task Force in Sonoma County with me and has participated in cultural burns with the North Fork Mono tribe led by Ron Goode. So here's Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Taylor. That was an awesome introduction. So before we get started today, and admittedly, this is going to be more for the non-Indigenous folks in the room, like myself, I ask you to join me in acknowledging that wherever you're currently located is land that sits within the traditional homeland of Indigenous people. Here in Sonoma County, we reside in the traditional homelands of the Wapo, Pomo, and Coast Miwok people. We respect and honor past.
Oh, if you could please unmute yourself, that would be, or please mute yourself. Sorry, because we can hear you.
Okay, I'm gonna go again. We respect and honor past, present, and future generations of these people and their continued connection to this land. We are grateful for the opportunity to gather in these beautiful places and give our respect to its first inhabitants. So, thing about land acknowledgements, they are an important means of communicating respect. Thank you for taking the time to do them when you do them at your events, but please be sure to communicate to others and also to carry this out yourself, to follow up your respectful land acknowledgement words with actions. Support local tribes, Indigenous-led organizations, and artists. Read up on the history, educate yourself, and help others to find useful resources. These are ways you can be a good ally. We've provided some resources for you in the chat where you'll find a link where you can donate to the North Fork Mono tribe and support their work, which you've signed up to learn more about tonight. And if you're a Sonoma County resident interested in learning more about the local Native community, we've also left a link to a page with more resources that are for you to get started on your research. So we have a great lineup for you this evening. Thank you so much for being here. As we've already found, when you are unmuted, it can disrupt the event for other people. So if you could kindly mute yourself so that there's no background noise, and we'll try to do the same. Sometimes hosts forget to. So anywho, yeah, so we have a great lineup for you this evening, starting with, once I shut up, a viewing of a documentary that introduces you to Ron and his work and explains a little bit about cultural burning and traditional ecological knowledge. Then we'll hear from Ron Goode himself. He will have a presentation, and after that, there will be time for respectful discussion, questions, and maybe, if you're lucky, some answers too. The ground rules: at any time, please feel free to leave questions, comments, or concerns in the chat. We will be monitoring that throughout tonight's event. And with respect to our presenter and those whom we're sharing this space, please keep yourself on mute unless you've been called on to speak. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. We really appreciate you. Jason, let's roll that film.
You have to know how to work with fire. When you're my age, I take my young ones out, smell the smoke, smell it. That's grass fire. Smell the smoke, that's a house burning. Smell the smoke, that's tires burning. That's a wood fireplace burning. You should be able to smell every single different kind of smoke. The animals teach their young to do that. But if there's no fire, they can't teach them to do that. That's why we have to burn. That's why we have to keep the fires going, so that all parts of life understand what it is that we're doing with fire. The North Fork Mono and most of the other Mono groups have been here for 15,000 years. When the Indian was out on the land, they always burned. So the use of fire comes through your land so that it can take care of your resources and give you new ones. Cultural burning is exactly that. So when we burn, we are burning to perfect this resource to supply resources for our culture, rather it be food, medicine, fiber, sticks, basketry material.
Didn't you guys just burn it?
It's been a few years. We've burned like, I don't know, 50 yards in all directions. And so this was part of like a little plot we had burned here.
So these are new shoots right here coming up. It's good to see this. We'll have the berries to eat. If you eat them red and dry with salt,
In this particular area, this is where we've been burning for the past 5-6 years. We've applied fire here a couple of times. This is the Mariposa gray leaf manzanita. This is a medicine, both food and medicine. The berry could be, once it's fermented, a really good drink for your stomach. One of the things that we've done here is we've burned underneath this and pruned this bush up, trimmed it up so that, one, it will have these nice big bunches of berries. And then on the stalk here, the bark is peeling. This bark is used for poison oak. When you're burning, you try to get the wind to go in the direction of the resource that you want to apply smoke to. Smoke helps the leaves and the berries to become a better product. Consequently, there's been new growth. That's all a part of the end result of applying fire and smoke to the resource. We were burning an area that hadn't been burned for well over 100, 120 years. And when we did burn, these bushes that we're standing in the middle of that are basically 3 foot tall were about 5 or 6 feet tall, and so thick you could not walk through them. So dry that lichen and California dodder, which is a parasite, was beginning to crawl all over them and kill them. So it needed fire. This land needed fire. You need to be able to see through the trees. The concept that we are bringing forth when we work out on the land is this open concept. We've got to be able to see through. When the baby is inside of the basket, look through the basket. See the world. See through the basket to the outer world. See through the forest. See through from this world to the next world. Always the ability to see through.
Fire keeps the ground clean, fire keeps our environment clean. Fire is to keep the plants healthy, that they keep growing more materials for us to use. It's a win-win situation for the plant and for us. Every plant is affected by fire. We as basket weavers, we are totally dependent upon the land for all of our materials because we can't go down to Michael's and buy all of our basket materials. And we need a full year, full cycle to gather our materials. This plant is struggling, but if it could get burned and burned back, it would have a whole bunch of new, just really straight shoots come out the top. But you can see how long of a piece that we need. One good thing, if we could have a fire, it brings the springs back. The water level comes up. So the springs hold more water.
Fire is always about water. Why are these still green? These are beautiful. We haven't seen water for a month. Because they're holding water in their root system. And why does the water still in the river, creek down here? Because all these plants are still holding water and letting the water go gently down into the creek. When you open this up, snow, rain is able to get to the root system. And then the root system retains water. What we have done here by opening up this forest and this little ecosystem is we've returned the water.
Native communities in California in the past have used fire for a whole variety of purposes, including increasing the fruit production of plants, burning plants in order to encourage a certain sort of plant growth.
I think a really critical part of the way that it was done here in California is that when they did small burns, what would happen is you would get grasslands and berries and other plants that would come back. And typically, studies that have been done suggest that the diversity and the density of the foods that are from those plants really increases in that year or two after a burn.
This idea that you have a moderate level of disturbance, that's when you have the highest levels of diversity and richness in an environment.
By doing something like here, like the cultural burn, we're hoping and looking forward to obviously, the straighter shoots and everything, but better berry production, the next season. So, we're all kind of curious and excited to see the fruits of our labor, come next season and see where we're at with this. So, Before we burned, when all this was still pretty overgrown and everything, I don't think any of us had noticed that any of this was actually growing here. So after it burned and everything, it was probably just kind of choked out by a big mass of sourberry that was here.
Today at the cultural burn site, the community fire crew was able to do a little bit of preparation for a burn in a few months, reducing the risk that when we light that burn, the fire will escape very quickly. So usually one of the top priority objectives of a prescribed burn would be to clear out the shrubs and trees that are representing fuel that a wildfire could come in and burn. It usually has a creeping fire where the fire creeps along the ground and under the trees and even some of the shrubs without burning them to a crisp. Fire is really a lot like electricity. Electricity is a dangerous thing. You can get a severe shock from electricity and it can kill people, but it can also be put to wonderful uses. And fire, when used in a sophisticated manner, is very much the same way. Fire can course through the forest like electrons through a wire and energize those circuits that the forest has. It can turn on the meadows and encourage them to bloom at the right time of the year.
Fire is a spirit. This land has spirits. And when we're burning, they come alive. And those spirits, they still here. That's why we do sing to them. That's why we do talk to them. You have to understand fire. You have to respect fire. You can't be afraid of it. If you're afraid of fire, you won't understand fire.
The Spaniards wanted to suppress fire because they saw it as dangerous and did not necessarily understand what purposes people were putting the fire to. They saw it as a careless application of fire by what many of them referred to as, quote, primitive people, unquote. So fire suppression is very much tied up with social and political oppression of Native American people. It might sound like a good thing to have a lot of trees. That's what the Forest Service thought. And they wanted to maximize the number of trees per acre. But what they were doing was changing the landscape, getting lots of little thin trees in between the bigger trees and the wide spacings that had been maintained for thousands of years by indigenous fires. By suppressing fire and keeping people from lighting cultural burns, you built up the fuel over time. And that's what has led to a situation today where the forest is full of trees, but really closely packed and ready for that spark and for a huge wildfire to start at any time.
We continue to follow breaking news out of the Santa Clarita area where 200 firefighters are battling a fast-moving brush fire along northbound Highway 14 near Sand Canyon. It's quickly burning, currently at 2,500 acres with 0% containment.
A devastating blaze tearing through Southern California overnight. Moving fast, tripling in size and engulfing more than 18,000 acres of land. More than 82,000 residents have evacuated as air tankers work tirelessly to douse the flames. The Blue Cut fire started Tuesday, just 60 miles east of Los Angeles, closing down a major interstate and roadways as it grew. The governor of California declaring a state of emergency.
Fire is going to be on the land whether we like it or not. We could either choose when and where and how we prepare for it and how to deal with it, or continue on with fire suppression and hope really that it don't come back, but it eventually will. And the problem is it becomes these high-intensity super fires that cause nothing but damage. There's no benefit to it. I'm doing some shell sorting, the heavy fractions from flotation that we took in our tribal's traditional territory. finding even some fragments of fire-cracked rock, and getting a good number of all this for its relevance in our land tending uses in our territory. With cultural burns, you not only are removing those fuel loads that create those super fires, but you're healing the earth. When you wait for those big super fires or those wildfires, they destroy the soil, they bake the soil, it sterilizes it, kills a lot of the fire-dependent and non-fire-dependent seeds in the seed bank. It gets to a level of intensity where people can't stop it or suppress it anymore. Having prescribed burns, cultural burns, is something that we all realize, at least with experience on the land, that is something that needs to be done.
I've heard some forests describe this as an ecological disaster on the scale of Hurricane Katrina. Tree mortality is a huge problem in the Sierra right now. There are millions of dead pine trees, even without thinking about whether there's a hugely elevated fire risk because of these brown and dried needles. It's a different forest from now on than it was, a couple years ago or 10 or 20 years ago. Even if you view this as a catastrophe or a disaster, it can also be viewed as an opportunity for the Forest Service to collaborate with tribes like Gold Springs Rancheria of Mono Indians to really talk together and collaborate and design those fires and those burn plans in such a way that you can meet the objectives that a tribe might have for caring for its cultural resources, while at the same time linking together many, many cultural burns to build a whole area of reduced fire risk, because you are reducing the amount of fuel in the area at the same time. So the Forest Service came in about a month and a half ago and conducted this burn, and did give some notice to the tribe that they were going to conduct the burn to improve the health of the oaks and increase acorn production. Definitely affected the trees. It looks like they're greening up and coming back. The future of fire really depends on more collaboration between American Indian tribes and other agencies who have an interest in and a stake in fire, and how to use it and how to minimize its destructive risks and maximize its creative potential.
If you have a brand new house and nobody lives in it and nobody cares for it, in a matter of a couple of years, it will begin to fall apart. It needs to have somebody living in it. And this land has to have somebody living in it. When you live in the mountains, when that's been your home, you know when your home is dirty. You know when your home needs to be cleaned. You know when things are not right. And so by not having fire on the land, not only Native Americans, ranchers, people who use the mountains, people who understand the forest, they'll all tell you the same thing. Our forest is trashy. You cannot leave it like that. You have to have fire in order to have rejuvenation.
I hope you guys enjoyed that movie. That was just sort of a brief introduction to what Ron is going to be talking about. And of course, what Ron is going to be talking about is going to come from his entirely unique perspective and the perspective of a time depth of knowledge of this landscape that has run through generations. And I think that's really important to note, that climate change means something different when you have that type of knowledge. So hopefully, if you came tonight with little or no understanding of what traditional ecological knowledge or cultural burning means, hopefully that video helped to prep you a little bit so you have a better foundation of awareness to build off of. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce the Honorable Ron Goode, Tribal Chair of the North Fork Mono Tribe.
All right, that works. Am I on? I guess so.
You're on. Go ahead, Ron.
You're on.
Yeah, you hear me? Thank you. Let's see. That's a good film. I like that. Film. A lot of things came to mind when I was listening to everybody talk again, and then we're looking at what we're doing. Wanted to say thank you to Taylor. I believe that when you're acknowledging the fires that are going on and you know, all the community, the people that are maybe suffering right now or you know, definitely about to, we want to think of them and keep them in our hearts. I want to start with the fact that fire is scary. Fire is very scary. It's very scary, like when you're not prepared for it, when you're not ready for it. And unfortunately, in the world we live in right now, we're pretty much like that. Don't know what our expectations are, you know. We don't like wildfire. We all cry about it. We all holler about it. We all talk about it. Very few do anything about it. And there are, you know, opportunities and abilities, I'll use that word, to be able to go out there and connect to your agencies, to your governments, to your counties, to all sorts of organizations, get involved and do something about it. We've been burning for, well, thousands of years. I personally have been burning pretty much all my life, and had the opportunity to go to Australia in around 2010 or so and meet with the Aborigines, and they came here to California, to our lands, and met with us. When I went to Australia, I also got a chance to go to New Zealand and meet with the Maori and talk to them, their water people. The Mardu of Western Australia, and all the Australian folks are, I want to say not all of them, most of them are all fire people. There are a few water people. And I use that concept in terms of we all come from one of the elements. Could be water, could be fire, could be the land, could be the sun. And when you talk to the indigenous people worldwide, those who understand and know where they come from, they will tell you that, you know, we're grass people, we're land people, we're sun people, we're earth people, we're water people. They will let you know that. And I think that's in part in our souls. We've kind of sometimes forgotten who we are. We've forgotten our connection to out here on the land. And I'm constantly emphasizing the, living on the land. I'm writing an article with some great authors right now, due to come out either this fall or this spring. And one of our concepts that we're really highlighting is, what is it like, when we lived on the land? What does that mean? That doesn't mean that you get to go out and camp on the land. That doesn't mean you get to go out and spend a summer on the land. That doesn't mean that you get to go out hiking on the land, or, that you even are doing a restoration project on the land. That's not living on the land. And so when we look back at the Native American, and I'm just going to go to us, it could be worldwide, you can pick any indigenous group worldwide, that have lived there for thousands and thousands of years, sustaining and thriving, continually growing in population, because they understood the land. They understood what they needed. And when we are burning, we as Native folks, and we're doing, we say cultural burning, but when we're burning for to increase productivity of whatever product that we need to enhance and rejuvenate. So this is why it's really important. If you lived out on the land and you have a family and you needed a certain medicine, or you're just basically out of food, and you knew that you can walk 10 miles and get enough food for your family to eat, but that's 10 miles out, that's pretty much one day's hike. Then you camp over, and then you hike back and you collect some more, and you come back to the family. Well, the family's been without food for 2 days. They hungry. So back out, you got to go again someplace else. That's all you would do your entire life. That don't work. So that's why when you look at the meadows, we have well over 8,000-9,000 meadows throughout the Sierra Nevadas. And almost every one of them have, an archaeological site where, the Indian people lived at some point in time for some period of time. And when we think in terms of today, we want to go shopping, we think about which mall we want to go down on. Which one has the best stores? Which one has a store that we want to go to? Well, you lived out on the land, your mall and your refrigerator was the meadow. And the surrounding watershed, because that's where your life was at. You could not afford to go beyond that for any length of time unless you were moving from one spot to another. So everything had to be there. When we go out and we restore the meadows, then we're bringing back water, but we're removing what doesn't belong there. What doesn't belong there on the meadow are species that are basically water users, water suckers. They're gobbling up all the water. When you look at the big trees, pines and oaks, that are been overgrown and they're on the meadows or near the meadows, they reach down 6 to 7 feet, 2 meters plus to get water. But native plants and shrubbery can only go down 1 meter. Flowers can only go down 1 foot to 2 feet at the most. So flowers don't come back until after you burn. Flowers don't come back until after the water table rises. And so that's always been a statement in our creation stories, and whenever we're burning, it's the Noom needs to get their fires off the land so the water will come back up. That's the concept. That's the idea. And when we do burn, the water comes back up to the surface. And as I said earlier, the root system can then hold the water. And all the flowers out there, they're pulling water at the surface. And then the small vegetation plants start coming in, and they're holding water. And a few of the bigger shrubbery starts to hold water. Everybody's holding water at a different distance. Instead of not being there, being dried out, dying, and only the big trees able to get the water. So that's kind of when we look at our meadows throughout the Sierras, most of our meadows are 1/3 of what they used to be. And as the Sierra National Forest has said, and I've quoted them over and over, is that basically 75% of the meadows, or 70% of the meadows need maintenance or repair. 25% of the meadows are non-existent, and only 5% of our meadows are healthy, and even those need some work. So what's non-existent? 25 meadows that are no longer visible, or they are not functioning to be called a meadow. We've been going back in and restoring these meadows and restoring them to the point that protecting non-existent meadows and bringing back the water so that the water's full in the springs all year long. And so now you have the vegetation. Now we start looking at the community. We start looking at the community of the life, the different species, because as you brought back water, you brought back various plants, medicines, flowers, young trees. Now the animals come. They bring their little ones. They bring their young ones. The deer come. The deer have their little ones. They eat the young oaks that grow up to about 3 to 5 years. It takes a deer 2.5 to 3 years before they can be impregnated, 8 months for gestation. So you got 3 to 3.5 years, and they come back with a baby. And this then you're perpetuating a tradition. And they keep bringing their little ones back and say, hey, I used to eat this young tree right here, but that one's gone now, so we moved to another young one. They won't eat the tree between 5 and 10 years. I don't know, it doesn't taste good. Haven't tried it. But after about 10 years, then the leaf would change again because they start nibbling on those. And you start seeing the lower canopy of the tree rising. And so you get to understand that there's certain things about the vegetation that each of these animals are a part of. And that's what creates the community. And different insects and different species start coming in. During the drought, when the meadows that we had restored, we had very little dead trees in the meadows. But outside of it, there were tons of trees. The bark beetle had gone wild. in one of our meadows, we had over 4 dozen mantids. Not sure if you know what a mantid is. It's AKA praying mantis. Praying mantis eat just about everything, including bark beetles. So in that meadow, we didn't have any bark beetles, but we found 1 or 2 that had escaped. In the other meadows, we kept calling for the praying mantis. Where are you? Where are you? Why are you not down here? After about 3 years of the drought in one of our lower elevations, a praying mantis showed up one day. And I looked at him and I said, where have you been? Why did it take you so long to get down here? He looked back at me and he said, do you know how many meadows there are in between here and there? I said, okay, I understand. So there are things that, you know, the world of our relationship we talked about, these are our relatives, and it's important because they're a community. Just like in our human community, if we are not functioning properly as a community, then, you know, we're going to be non-existent. That will happen. So when we're a good functioning community, then we start thriving. And those as a whole community, you know, we're not looking yet. That's why we got too many wildfires going on, because we haven't been able to address that. And that's, I'm going to stop here for a second, but that's what we said when we was in Australia. Go home, take care of your backyard. That's all we can do. We can't do anything more than that. My backyard is 4 counties. I take care of Mariposa, Madera, Fresno, and Tulare. Well, I got a big backyard, but that's all I got. And so we try to encourage other people, take care of your backyards. Do what you can for yourself, and pretty soon we'll all be taking care of our backyards. So let's move quickly to the climate change harvest. So I did a study after I came back from Australia, and looking at a number of species that we gather all the time, and trying to understand climate change. Because what I started to hear, and people were pretty scared of climate change, that, oh my gosh, we're in climate change and the world's coming to an end. They spoke of global warming. When I went to my elders, they said, oh, we know about climate change and we know about global warming. And I said, well, you know, that's, I don't understand why you know that. And they said, well, because it's been here before. And generational knowledge tells us that we've been through this before. And so we'll go through it again. And so I started to have a better understanding then that, you know, our people have survived through, you know, clear back into the 1450 to 1650, we survived through mega droughts and, you know, floodings and global warmings. So one of the droughts was 250 years, the other was 180. And from 1550 to 1850, we have had a 20-year drought every century. And we're now in a 32-year drought from 1987, even though we've had 5 little droughts and El Niños and everything else in between, flooding, and that's just the kind of, that's what is climate change right now. We're going from one point to another. Like every day we wake up and it's going to be 113 degrees today. Oh, but tomorrow it's only going to be 103. And it's like, what do you mean? How does it do that, right? How is that? How is this happening? I walk outside, and since July, my deciduous trees are losing leaves. in July. You know, that shouldn't be happening until September. And so, but what I discovered when I looked at this chart is that we have a window. We have a harvest window. And in that harvest window is where the fluctuation presides. And so each year you see the little lines, and you'll see you had maybe 2 or 3 harvests in which months: late May, June, July, late July. The next year you only had one window, and that was a short window from May to June. The next time it was, 2 harvests. And then that's the way it goes. And then, you're all of that falling within your harvest window, but each year your actual harvest time was shortened. So sometimes you might be gathering your acorns September to October, early October. Might be early October to late October. It might be late October to mid-November. You might be mid-November to early December. This might be your harvest window. But at the same time, when we've changed back a little to where we have plenty of water, so we were in a 5-year drought from 12 to 17. 17 had plenty of water. 18 was not so good, but we had plenty of snow. 19 was not so good, but we had plenty of snow. But that stabilized the harvest window so that we ended up with 3 acorn harvests in late September to early October, and then again late October to early November, and then mid-November to December. So we still hit the harvest windows, and we had actually 3 harvests again. And so that's a little bit of explanation to move it up a little bit. So then the 3-leaf sumac, you see that, and then the blue elderberry, everything's almost the same as what I'm saying. You begin to look at that and see when we had harvest that year, what particular year, and if it was a light harvest, a good harvest. But they're always falling within that window, sometimes maybe just very slightly. If we were looking at the blue elderberry there, 2016, it was a early September and a little bit further than the actual harvest window in November. But that doesn't mean that that's not a norm. So sometimes it might just barely reach outside of it, but you still have the top line up on top is your harvest window. And so everything just kind of moves around back and forth. Black oak, we're at black oak, you can see where it got pretty bad for a little while, only a very short period of time, 2013 and 12, late October to early November. One little small window is all you had for acorn. The last couple of years, we've been 2018, we even reached outside of that window just a little bit because again, we got plenty of water now. Go back up, keep going, next page, last page. And then this is the golden cup, the golden oak. Same kind of thing we're looking at what we have there. So, I mean, you can go on to a number of different species and try to track them and see what we've had. But this was something that I wanted to share with you so that you could have a little better understanding when we all, get nervous and scared and we're talking about climate change. What does that mean? What exactly does that mean? And how does that apply? And, and I've had people tell me, oh, acorn is falling in July. And so, you know, and when they're not supposed to be falling until September, but acorn is falling in July. But well, you know, I wouldn't try eating them. I wouldn't try eating them. What I discovered along the line there was the strawberry will ripen in April, and then it has no seed inside of it, and so not until the real crop comes in June. So again, we call that, you know, kind of a false productivity. And so, but it's due to climate change, because the plant doesn't have an understanding of what am I supposed to do and how am I supposed to handle this. You know, first I don't have any water, I don't have enough water, then I have too much water. The meadows were the same way. And so we had, after the drought, we had trees died in the meadow because they had too much water. And I always use this little crazy analogy, but if you have a canteen of water and you are on the desert and you crawl all the way across the desert with that one little canteen of water, you make it clear across the desert, and you find a nice, cool, cold spring, and you just stick your head down inside that spring and you just suck up all that good water, and then you roll over and you die. Well, because that's not how you were living. You had learned to live through the drought, and a lot of our trees were that way. I went out and I photographed and saw trees that basically were dead, and all the tips of their oaks were pretty much dead. Then all of a sudden, here come water. Well, the tips, the new life was not going to grow on the tips of the trees. So where did it grow? It grew on the trunk and started over because it was still alive. All right, let's move into the program. Or do you want questions? Where you at? Steph?
Ron, let's do your PowerPoint.
Okay, how are we doing on time?
We have
We're doing good.
about half an hour. Does that work for you? Then we can do a half hour for questions.
Okay, I got no problem.
Okay.
So so this just a little, I've got a couple of other people don't have listed on there that are part of my team, and but I'm constantly working on bringing in different folks to work with us and to help us in our efforts, or rather we're working on meadows or resources or you know, landscape, whatever we're doing. We try to keep going, and you need a good sized team to be able to do that. Next. So I jumped ahead a little bit, but that's okay. You don't have to go back. You saw where it said ceremonial fire, and I recently wrote an article on cultural fire, and one of the things that in my February burn that we had in Mariposa, one of our spiritual leaders, you know, was speaking and was talking about ceremonial fire. While we talk about cultural fire, we're talking about, you know, fire that is working with our cultural resources and pertinent to our livelihood and our way of living. So that's why we call it cultural fire, because we're working to restore and give new life back to, you know, the vegetation that's going to be productive for us to live on, rather it be medicines or basketry plants, fiber, foods, any of these resources. And so that becomes the cultural aspect. And as my good friend Jared would always say, you know, cultural means to cultivate. And so cultivate, this is what we're doing. We're doing agricultural work. And I use that word because, you know, it's always been said that the Native American were not agriculturalists. They horticulturalists at best, you know. It's like, you know, but of course, folks were always looking to ways to put us down and keep us down. But when we look at this fire, you know, look into that fire. You know, I see a coyote standing up. Maybe he's a bear, got a long nose. You know, maybe he's an Indian with a coyote on his head. These are the spirits of the fire. And they're there because the spirits of the land are there. And we have to acknowledge them in the sense that why we start with prayer, why we start with song. We started with a good song when we started this program. That was good. And so we call this, you know, ceremonial fire because that's what we start with. And therefore we're connecting spiritually to the land, to fire. Fire is not just a tool. That's what prescribed fire, you know, the prescribed fire people use it as a tool. It is a tool, but it's not just a tool. It has a spirit. And when you look at those big, dangerous wildfires, look at those clouds, look into those clouds. You're not going to like what you see staring back at you. I guarantee you. So just important. And it's important that we continue to put, you know, fire on the land. And we have a lot of volunteers. At the February one, we had over 100 volunteers come in from various agencies and colleges and universities and tribes and the community, you know, everybody coming together to work the land. Next. I found this really, you know, a nice, pretty bush, and it's a way to look at the pretty bush, and say, oh, you know, Redbud is so beautiful, and you know, people put them in their towns, and people have them all around their homes, and it is such a gorgeous looking plant, but pretty much a fire hazard. Sorry. And it's pretty much useless as far as being able to use it. So next. So when it's dead, we burn it. Or if it's dying, we burn it. But before you get started, you got to prune it. You got to prep. You got to prep your burn. If we don't have fire trucks, we don't have water tanks on our backs. We don't have, you know, fireman suits. We don't have red cards. No, won't even get one. But when we burn, you know, we can easily light the land up, and we're about 7-8 miles from Mariposa. We'd probably burn it down if it got away from us. So we have to burn to understand that we can burn this, what we're going to do, and burn it, and it safely be burnt. And when it does burn, however, and you're out there, it takes about a good 20 minutes for you to actually burn. It takes a whole hour for you to burn. But then there's a 20-minute span in there when that thing is burning so hot. It's like, you know, pretty wild for a moment. But we know it's going to burn down. Next. So again, you can see behind Jess there, how we've already prepped the land and opened up the land and moved everything. I don't know who all's on the line, but in case you're burning, and I have burners on the line, and we had to make sure that we moved away from the power line. Now, the power line that we have there on this property basically has no juice. It's not turned on for the home spot there, but there's probably power in the line. So even smoke could generate a spark from that line down to the ground. So we didn't burn under the power line. We were pretty careful not to do that. These are just a little precautions. But now you see how we're starting to burn next. After we've burned, it's the end result that when we burn, we already know what it's going to look like. We already know what harvest is going to look like. As I get through this presentation, you'll begin to see that after a year or two, we're harvesting. And one of the basket maker that was talking, the lady in the white in the video, Lois, she gathered 2 big armloads out of this batch, and the following year my Dunlap ladies came and they harvested out of this next. So it just gives you an idea from when we burned it in February 2018 to July of 2019. This is what it's now looking like, and this is what she was talking about. When you burn it, it's going to have nice straight shoots, and you're going to be able to make a lot of baskets. Next. Showing some of our volunteers in 2019, and one of her little armloads of redbuds, and she was the first one to harvest, so she was being very particular exactly what kind she wanted and just how long she wanted them, and so she got first dibs on the bush, but she also got prime sticks, and so we have a great time because we have a nice cookout, and you see Pete Molina there bent over the cooking pot and keeping the fire stirred up, and we hire our cooks, and we have great food, and we have a great time. Fortunately, that was before COVID. Next. So when we talk about why it needs to be burned or what needs to be burned, the bush technically is still green, but inside of it, it's dying, and underneath it, it's dying. Next. So again, we must prep the burn, and that whole area there was one solid bush, and it went right back into the trees. So if we didn't start to create smaller burns, and even though you're burning one little spot, it still affects everything around you. Next. I reached down pretty far in my pool, and of course this is one of my youngest granddaughter, and she's the outdoors one. She loves to get out there and work with us, so she's learning how to do burning already. Next. Using our wonderful UC Ag Resource Extension folks. This is Rebecca Ozerin, and helping us to do some burning, and they help us in many other ways as well. Next. Here we had Chris from UC Davis, and he came down for several years, giving us a hand, bringing down his entire classes, and down with Beth Rose Middleton. And then my nephew next to him,
he's also a firefighter, a captain in one of the fire crews from Redding. I think he's located down in LA right now. Next. So you begin to see that, you know, when we say restoring the three-leaf sumac at this point in time, you can't make a basket with those sticks, and you're definitely not going to get any food off of them or anything else at this point in time. It's a fire hazard. Next. So again, putting fire on the ground is very important, and keeping fire going every year. Next. This was our start of our burn and what it looked like. You're going to see several pictures on that same angle. Kind of look at that manzanita bush in the back, and you can barely see it, but in the middle there's some rocks sticking up. Those will become a lot more plant. You'll be able to see them. Next. So my good buddy that I've had around for quite a few years, Jared is you know, a fantastic historian, and you heard him in the video. He's wanted to be a fire practitioner all of his life too, and now he is one. So here we go. Next. So getting the fire, sometimes you gotta know how to light your fire and where it's gonna burn. And you gotta understand the wind. Sometimes you're burning against the wind. You're not burning. You don't always burn with the wind. Next. So when he got done with his burn, then this is what it looks like, and this is how it's supposed to look. So you see the rocks in the back. Those are actually part of an archaeological site. So this whole thing is part of an archaeological site. I'll talk more about that as we go. Next. So this is looking again at Jared's burn, and you saw what it looked like before we burned. You saw what it looked like when we burned it. You saw what it looked like when it was done, and that was in February. This is April, 2 months later. And this is outside of the burn. Look at all the flowers that are up. And then in the burn, you see the new shoots of the three-leaf sumac, but you also see other plants coming up. And the medicine plants constantly come up that we didn't even know was there. They start coming up because the seed has been laying there as well. Next. This is my nephew, Jess. Jess has been with me for at least 10 years or more. And so part of our tradition of burning, we look at burning in the way that we do things from 0 to 5 is what we call the explorative years. A young person is, you know, learning, and they're kind of learning on their own, you know. So they might touch something that's hot. They might touch something that's cold. They need to experience these things, and there's always been a concept or a saying that, you know, wild little Indians, because the little kids are always running around, but you know, in that early age, you don't try to use the word no. We want them to learn, to experience, to understand things, not be afraid of stuff. And then you move from there to, you know, a little bit more of the discipline years, from 6 to 12, the rite of passage, from 12 to 15, and then from your early teens to your mid 20s, you're kind of a renegade again, but you know, while you know, a teenager, and you're learning, you think you know something, but you really don't. Then you hit the age of 25, and now it's productivity time between 25 and 50. So that's usually about the time that we start seriously training. And Jess was in his early 20s when he started learning how to do fire. He's in his mid 30s now, and you know, he can teach. He could be doing this Zoom right now, and he knows everything that I know, and he's just starting. We move from there. We look at burning from about 40 years, from 25 to 65. That's pretty much what I am right now. And so, you know, I just sit back and teach and make sure everything's going well and how it's supposed to be going. So, you know, let other people do the work. And so, but when you're out there burning and you've burned something 3 times in 10 years or 4 times in 15 years, you're not going to have to burn again for another good 15 years. And so as we lived on the land and we worked the trails and we worked the land, so you have something nice and clear, and you were a burner and you went over the pass, over the mountains, and you took care of a certain area. You took care of your backyard, meaning wherever you traveled. And you did your burning properly, you pretty much are done after 30 years or so. So in the next 10 years, you might get somebody else started helping to do what you were doing. And so that's a good, like a rule of thumb to look at and begin to understand. So next. And Jesse, he was offered drip torches. He didn't like them. He wouldn't take them. He said, just give me my match or give me my lighter, and I'll show you how to burn. Next. The flames do get pretty high, as I said earlier. They do get to cooking. You can't stand very close to that heat. Next. Oh yeah, before I go back one. Right up on top there, I don't know, you probably can't see it. I got a little arrow there, but you see a ball beginning to be released. That little ball can jump. That little ball can go many, many feet. You know, in bigger wildfires, that's how the fire jumps. Next. So after 1 month or so, we were out there checking them out, and you can see how all the burns were nice and clean, and we were looking around, and my other nephew Daniel is trying to see you know, what's coming up. Next. Yeah, and we do have a brand new sprout after 1 month. Next. After 2 months, look how quickly it has come back. Next. Kind of threw this one in there, probably could have been a little further back, but one of the point of we're always saying that we're burning the resource down. Your fire might actually be on the bottom, but we're bringing the brush and on top of the resource and burning it down to the ground. We're not burning through it to where the root system is being damaged. Next. So highly important though, as we're burning, and that we go along and trim all the little hairs and little stalks, we call them, that didn't get burned, and clean them all up, put them in the fire. This fire has to burn down. It cannot leave that the wood charcoal. Next. Once it's burned down, Then you mix it and you bring in the topsoil. And so you see the ashes now in one little spot, and folks are going along clipping all the little hairs, so it's just nice and smooth. Next. Basically manicuring it, correct? Next. Takes a lot of work. Mopping it up, cleaning it up, mixing in that topsoil, very important. You're making a new nutrient. Next. So like I said, we have many different tribes. I think I have over 8 different tribes joining me. Some of those folks are now going out. Dirk right back there and Jared are forming a new burn association. I'm really proud of them, and they're really doing good. They've got several tribes joining them, and they've got a lot of ranchers and folks that are, you know, needing to burn and wanting to burn. So you know, it's just fantastic to see this new growth going. And then very important having the college students there, because you know, they're going back to their colleges and they're talking about what they did, you know, with you know, their personal involvement. Next. So, you know, once you get it all done and ready and prepped and ready for water. Next. Like I said, you mix in the topsoil. Next. It becomes a new nutrient. Throw a little water on top of it. Next. You know, watering it. Now you're waiting for the rains. The rains are going to come usually the next week. Next. Got time for a little break. Sit down, have a little lunch. That's Jared on the right, Jesse, Ray Gutierrez, and Billy Leonard, the tribal chair for Mariposa, the Miwok. Next. And you know, get a few of the elders there talking it over. My good buddy Galen in the background. We lost him last year, but I'm glad that he ended up in our videos and ended up in our photos. Next. Some of our Middlebury folks, Stephanie started bringing them over. Christina continued the tradition on the end there, and Christina's now working with me on some trails, and we've got Meadows coming up to continue work. Gabe's been down, and a few others, and Kyle has worked on a video. There's a link for his video. It's a really excellent video. One of my young spiritual young men in the back. That's one of my relatives back there, and he's coming along. Next. Just gives you a real quick idea when you look at it. You got to kind of look at it a little closely, but I've been talking about all along of who came and who was there and what days they were able to come. And if you can come one day, that's fantastic. You come 3 days, better yet. You can stay for 4 days, love it. Next. And of course, that particular one was with UC Davis. I had one scheduled in March and COVID came along. We had 96 to 100 people in February, and we were looking already at well over 80, 85 in March. And so a lot of folks that I had to turn away in February were scheduled for March. Didn't get to come out, but we'll have more. Next. These again are some of my elders. These are Dirk's tribe from Dunlap, and Julie and Joe and Gladys and Carly and Denise from the She's the CAL FIRE archaeologist. And of course, my wife in the background. My wife's always in the background. Next. And this is a good friend of mine flew in all the way from Minnesota. It's like, wow, come all the way from Minnesota. She's a kick. She's, a Cherokee gal, and she was out here a few years ago. Was an intern with Ray Gutierrez and with Jonathan Long. And so we did some work on the forest, and then she worked on the meadows with us along with Ray. So just kept in touch and doing a lot of work back that way with her people and others. And so she, came all the way out to see us. Next. And so Chef Mo, Chief Mo, and, and his lunch stand was just fantastic. He says I'm a chef, and he knows his business. So love him. Next. Very important to the smoke on the land, and it's a thing I've written a few articles on. That Jared was talking about it in the video a little bit, and but the smoke gets up to into the trees where fire can't, unless you're going to burn it down, and that's not the whole point of it. So, we have a lot of mistletoe and California dodder and a number of other parasites that are killing our trees. And so the smoke gets in there and helps to rejuvenate them. Next. This is another portion of our land. The 19, we usually burn pretty close to 10 acres a year. Next. Whenever we're burning, because we're on about, I think it's expanded right now, but we recorded a 35, 40 acre archaeological site, and it's well over 50 acres now. And so this means that these were where the Miwok people lived, and a small estimate of 600 people once lived here on the land. I spoke with Billy Leonard, and he told me that their understanding that, if not right on the land in that general area, well over 1,000 people once lived here. So I'm sure that they came and went. It's like a small township. Next. Again, wherever we burn, we uncover new artifacts and things that we haven't seen before. So these are some fire-cracked rock cooking stones. Next. We did a broadcast burn in which most of my participants are all called in the meadow, and that's cool, like that. When we got done, took the tribal archaeologist and the UC Berkeley archaeology team, and we strolled through the burn, and we uncovered several house pits and several medicine rocks, all out in the pasture, never seen before. Next. To give you a little bit of idea what the site would have looked like if they lived here on the land. And the rocks that were in the background is where they processed their food, but out here on the ground is where they lived. Next. You see the different plants that are coming up. Next. This was in July, as we start to look at the vegetation and how it's growing. Some of those are pretty close to 2 feet tall now. 5 months later. Next. So all of that was burned, and If you look way in the back, you'll see bushes that are fairly thick, and those were not burned, and we were planning to burn those next, but I'll tell you a little bit more about that, but that came to harvest. So we have some more medicine plants that have come up, sunflowers and different plants within the burns. Keep going. Keep going. So again, we've already talked about how fast it comes back. Keep going. This is the redbud. Keep going. One of the things I keep talking about, and you keep hearing me say, is that every time that we burn, the medicine plants come back. You can barely see them, but on top of the three-leaf sumac is the sourberry bushes is tobacco, native tobacco. And I've always had native tobacco in and around this property. This property is 400 acres big. I never had tobacco on the property, but now wherever I'm burning, tobacco is there. Next. This, of course, is kind of what it should look like with the sourberries coming out and a nice harvest. Next. As I said before, hard to get rid of the invasives. We've burned these a couple times. We've now went back to manicuring them, and we'll see how that works. Next. Very important to what we're doing is the species, and you know, it's kind of a quick look there of you know, animals that are there, birds, shrubs, trees, insects, plants, reptiles. This is the community that I'm talking about. Each one of these are important to each other, and they're important to the land, and then they become important to you know, pollinating the plants and bringing in new plants. And you know, every animal brings in seed, birds bring in seed. And so if you open it up and you bring back the water, you know, it's kind of like the old saying goes, you build it and they will come. Next. And of course, that's exactly what it's about. Once we get our fires off the land, this is what the water looks like. You can also have a quick look at the pre-pasture burn that we did in 2020. So this was 2018. We hadn't burned over there. You see all the willows that are dying along the water's edge, because when the water was down, when we didn't have the fire going, then those willows were also dying. So we went in and burned all those. They are all coming back beautifully. Next. So then in 2020, we looked at the pasture burn, tarweed and star thistle. Tarweed is not an invasive, but it is when it takes over, and that's all is growing there. So, you know, and then the star thistle is very tough. You got to burn. This is like our second time of burning the star thistle. We'll go back one more year. I think after the third time, we're going to do a pretty good job on them. Next. So that was only a 3-acre burn, but it burned good. We had a nice plan. We knew how to burn it in sections and burn around. There was a hot spot on the meadow in which the tarweed was about 4 feet high, if not 5, some people said. That was the short people that walked through them. But in that event, we burned it correctly and appropriately. We had CAL FIRE out there with us, you know, and we had some Forest Service folks out there, and we had state forestry. We had Indian firefighters. We had everybody out there, but it was our team that's running the program. Next. And again, like I said earlier, burning through a prehistoric Miwok village. Next. This is what it looked like when we got done. You see all the willows are gone. You see the pasture's been burned. Next. 1 month later, You can start to see the shoreline starting to green up. Next. 2 months later, and voila, you know, look at the flowers and look at the beautiful little flower in the middle of all the flowers. Yeah, so, you know, she just loves her flowers. Next. But invasive plants love fire too. So they all coming back. But we'll take another run at them this next year. Next. Back to April, we're looking at the recovery, and look how green the edges of the pond and the elderberry bush. I thought it was pretty well dying, and we had collected out of there. The Miwok folks got some hand clappers out of there, and then when they were all said and done, my nephew and I and my wife, and we all went in there and we got some hand clappers out of there, and we found some more medicine rocks inside of the bush area. Next. So while we were down in COVID, we had a few Indian classes and see my grandkids making hand clappers. Next. This is a result of our clappers, and turned out pretty nice. Next. We were looking at our summer harvest, or what we were going to harvest, and how well it was going to be. Next. And we were not denied. Sourberry, some of these came out, Dirk said they come out like rosebuds. They filled up his entire hand. Next. Dirk went out there 2 or 3 times. I don't know how many times Dirk went out there. But what a guy, man. He went out there and picked it. We had harvest. Carly went out there. I was out there. We all enjoyed a good time. We got a lot of berries. Next. You can see what he was saying. They filled up, one bunch filled up his entire hand. Next. And of course, taking a look at our harvest of what we have. Now that I've had mine cured and working on them, I've been giving them away to friends and family as they come by. Next. When we got done with harvesting the sourberries, we also had to take some time to go get some mint. And we were able to collect mint. Next. Is there a next?
There's not a next.
There's not a next. Okay, so let's go back to me and picture, I guess.
Ron, I'm going to take just a quick moment and open up the question and answer for everyone. First of all, thank you, Ron. That was an awesome presentation. And yeah, so thank you for doing that. And if this work has piqued anyone's interest, I encourage you to give to the North Fork Mono Tribe via the link provided in the chat so that this important work can continue. And I'd like to open up the last, we have about 25 or so minutes left in tonight's program. So I'm going to open it up for questions and answers. We'll be using the handy dandy raise hand tool, which is if you look at the lower portion of your screen where it says participants, at the bottom of that window on the right side of the screen, click the button labeled raise hand. And when I see it, I'll call on you in the order I see it. So keep it up if you haven't been notified via the chat that we've seen you. And if you're not getting called on for whatever reason, please send us a message via chat or leave your question in there to potentially be answered by others who might be able to offer an answer as well. That said, we'll do our best to get everybody in there. So yeah, by all means, raise your hand. Let's get some questions going. Okay, let's hear from Chris Hamano. And Taylor or Tacey, could one of you call on Chris?
Hey there, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for putting this on, and thanks Ron for the presentation. Super informative, really cool stuff. Just real quick, 2 questions for Ron. The first one is, Ron, how did you realize, or when or how did you realize the significance of cultural fires? And the second question is, how would you prioritize cultural fires on a large list of indigenous knowledge and skills that will move society to a more communal, conscious, and naturally functioning population?
That's a powerful question. First one, however, is fairly easy. I grew up that way. And I grew up with a mother who knew and understood the ways and was able to explain to me when something needed to be burned and why it needed to be burned and how it needed to be burned. So, and then there was a couple of times, this you got to look at back, this is the 50s and 60s, that she actually did burn. And then of course the fire people came and the police people came and they all wanted to arrest her. But they never did, but that really was the whole, concept of you can't be burning. So that leads you into the second one about, society. And it's where I started by saying that, fire is scary and fire can be dangerous. And that's pretty much where the general society is at. And so when you talk fire, even here in my own neighborhood, whenever there's a fire, people, oh, don't even talk fire, don't even talk about it. It's like, yeah, well, you know what? You need to talk about it, because if you're taking care of the land, you won't have the kind of fire that you just, encountered. And so getting to that point to understand, as far as a priority is concerned, I've kind of had that question recently in one of my writings in terms of, what becomes a priority. And my answer with then is going to be the same as it is right now, that there is no priority. The priority is what needs to be taken care of. And we just make the time to take care of it and keep taking care of them. I can't get to it all, can't do it all, but we start working on the sources and resources that we need to have and that we use. So in this particular case, I'm burning 3-leaf sumac, which is the sawberry that you saw, the berry. The bush itself produces sticks for basketry. So my basket makers need to have those sticks. Burned the redbud because my basket makers need those sticks. The bush is dead. If we had a wildfire, everything that is dry or dying is going to burn, and that's what really lights up the fires. We've got fires going down south, we've got fires going up north. I don't know the north ground as well as I do the southern part, because a lot of brush is in the southern part, and they just haven't been caring for it at all. So it's going to burn. It's going to burn quick. But coming back to your question, that we pick out spots, and as you looked at some of my photos, you'll see there were pieces that were still left under trees, primarily because, you know, we were not able to either prune them, prep them and get them out from underneath the trees, or get the tree out of the way. And so if the tree was healthy, then I don't want to burn the tree. So that means that I've got to get in and get after the bush to be able to get it out, to burn it in a minimal manner. So it takes a lot of time and a lot of work. Like I tell everybody, you might prep for 2 hours and burn for an hour. Did I answer your question?
Yes, very much so. Thank you, Ron.
Okay, Ron, next we're going to hear from Robert Rogers.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for this presentation. My question is, in the examples that you showed us, it seemed like the Forest Service, the fire department, everyone else was pretty much on board with what you were doing. Are you finding that attitude beginning to change now? Or are you finding more agencies willing to work with you? Or do you find you're still running into that attitude of, we can't do this, fire's never a good thing?
Good question. I'll start at the end of your question. I believe that as a whole, most of the agencies are beginning to understand that fire is a good thing. All right, now, how we apply fire and how we go about doing that, that's a little bit different. And that is where we run into some difficulty. In Mariposa, they have a different attitude, and there's a lot of, they're mountain folks. They have a lot of ranchers who have been trained and they know about fire and they're not afraid of fire. So my permit there is, they actually don't have a cultural burn permit. They have just a regular ag permit. I have to write it in, but you know, these folks know when I come, they already have it on the computer and they just write it up and say, okay, I have a good season. However, CAL FIRE changes hands a lot. And so I still have to call them and talk to them. And, you know, for the first time in about 5-6 years, I had to spend a few minutes discussing things with them, you know, and so I never had that problem before. But in the past, what I've been told is that I can burn anytime, even if it's a no burn day, and that as long as I have my crew in place, then unless it's an extreme no burn day, and I said, well, if it's an extreme no burn day, I'm not burning either, so that you don't have to worry about that. But you move that concept then to Madera or Fresno, and everything changes. So don't have that kind of liberty. And with what we're doing, the permitting process is different though. And so for Fresno anyway, it's basically a 1 to 2 year permit. And so, but they have a lot of limitations on what you can burn and how you can burn. So yeah, so that varies. And then some of the native folks and some of the college folks burning up north, they had the same situation as me, where they had all their elders there and they had people in place and they had their own fire crews and they had CAL FIRE, and then all of a sudden they were told, no, this is a non-burn day, so we're not going to let you burn. You know, and you know, it really comes down to the personnel of who you're working with. So I've been working with state folks from the top as far up as I can go, and I invite these folks. We have people from the governor's office come to every one of our burns. This time we had someone from the state fire task force there with us as well, and I've invited the U.S. Forestry to come with us. I invited CAL FIRE for the first time to come and join with us, and so I'm trying to get folks to come to understand what we're doing. and why we're doing it, and the differences between what we do and what they do. And so, I think if we just keep doing that, we'll eventually get there. So, good question.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Ron, up next we have Goin Batist.
Hey there. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for all of this. So earlier this spring, I got to see my first conservation burn, and it was before the acorns fruited. And now they're like clusters of grapes. They're huge. There's so many. I've never seen them like that before. And then yesterday, about 80% of that land burned in this lightning complex fire that's happening up here. And my partner is walking around out there, and he says that the oak trees that were burned just yesterday are all dropping their acorns, as opposed to the ones that burned earlier in the year that are just loaded with acorns. And I'm from the coast, so I'm not as familiar with the oaks. And I would just love to know what you think about that and the timing of the burns and what impact that's going to have on the end of this year.
Well, I think first of all, it's going to have a great impact. Unfortunately, a bad impact on harvest, because, like you said, it's forcing them to drop too early, and so what you were experiencing on the growth of the acorn is what we do. And when you're putting fire under the oaks and you're taking, first of all, we do a broadcast burn, which takes care of the duff. And in that duff, you have weevils and worms and other parasites. When your acorn drops, they attack them immediately. I had a golden oak in which the duff was like 11 inches deep, because nobody had burned there. And then the oak itself was only about 4 feet from the ground. And so consequently, all the acorn were already attacked before they formed a cap. I mean, that was really strange, because that was telling me that they are so infested. It's kind of like fleas, right? You get fleas in your house from your animals or whatever, and you just like, man, I just cleaned my house. I just, took care of my rug and my carpet and did all this, or just did the animals. And how come we still got fleas? Because, it doesn't kill them all. And so consequently, when you have different parasites sitting underneath this tree that hasn't been burned for decades, then it's not just attacking what falls to the ground, it's attacking what's on the tree. And so that also means that acorn is not a very healthy acorn for the wildlife, not only for the Native American, but for the wildlife. And that's an important factor to take into effect, because as agencies and as governmental bodies and, as people of the land, we need to be taking care of the species that are out there. That's why I put so much emphasis on who's out there, what species are there. And, I ask agencies everywhere I go, whether it's park or Forest Service or, state agencies, give me a list of who lives out here. Who's out here? Who are the species? What species are out here? What are you burning? If you're burning something, who are you burning? Who are you killing? Whose home are you burning up? What are you doing? And they can't answer that. And yet they have people hired, they should be able to answer that and give me lists. They will give me a list of their rare species. They'll give me a list of their threatened species. They'll give me a list of their concerned species, but they can't tell me who lives there. And that's a shame, because when you go back to looking at how you're doing things as a whole, you need to be thinking of all aspects and taking care of everything, not just one thing. And so one of the things we did with that golden oak, of course, was not only take care of the duff burning from underneath it, then we trimmed the tree up so that it had a higher, or, you know, raise the canopy from the ground up, and then put some fire to it, put some smoke to it, and smoke the tree. And you got to wait for about 2 to 3 years before that really takes off, unless it's ready or unless it's been growing. So you take an oak that has been producing, now all of a sudden you put in fire and smoke to that, and it'll produce even bigger, or it'll produce in larger amounts. And I'm one of the few people who've been talking about mass production. And so acorn as a whole, acorn oaks as a whole will produce 25 to 50 pounds of acorn in a harvest. And if you get 2 or 3 harvests, that's good. Most of the time, you're only going to get 2 harvests out of your oaks. So maybe you had a good year and you get 50 pounds each. So now you got 100 pounds of acorn. That's quite a bit. That's going to take you a long ways. Most acorn makers need about 10 100-pound sacks of acorn. And the real good ones, the ones that are producing for big events and cooking acorn all the time, they need 20. So when you talk about going out to harvest and you're only getting 25 to 50 pounds, you know, how many trees do you have to go to, and how many groves do you have to go to try to get, you know, 2,000 pounds? So that you have to take that into consideration and understand then. So when you put fire under various trees that are mass producers, these mass producers can go 200 to 400 pounds of acorn, you know, a season. Now you're in business, right? So now you can go out there and you find 5 of those kinds of trees, and you're done, right? You're done. You're like, okay, I can go home now. And that is, like I said before, you know, what kind of mall are you going to? What kind of refrigerator do you have? And this is how they had to think a long time ago. You know, me, if I lived on the land, that's how I would think. You know, I'm kind of lazy myself. You know, I don't want to go tripping around no 10 miles looking for my food. That's not good. You know, I want to be home playing with my kids and doing whatever, you know. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, awesome, Ron. We are running out of time, but we have about 5 minutes left. So I have Christina McDonald with our final question, and then we will do a sign off.
Christina, she should be doing the talking.
Oh, yeah.
Is she there?
Christina McDonald, do you want to unmute yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. I hit the wrong button on my phone. I don't have a question.
Oh.
I know Ron very well. I'm Mono, so I'm good. Thank you. Good presentation, Ron.
Thank you.
Okay, well then I think that was our
We were on a call for 2 or 3 hours today, so.
Okay. All right, well, that's great. So I think that's about where we're going to close it for today. I want to thank you, Ron, for everything. This was an awesome program. Thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing with us your knowledge and your stories. Yeah, it was really wonderful to share this space with you. And thank you everyone else for coming out this evening, despite everything else that's going on in your lives. I know, like, here in Sonoma County, there's a lot going on lately. So, and all throughout California. And so thank you so much for coming out here tonight and spending some time with us and sharing this space. And I want to encourage everyone, if you want to support North Fork Mono Tribe's work and Ron Goode's work, please donate to the link that is in the chat that Taylor Pennywell is sharing regularly. And also, if you want to get in touch with Ron, one of the best ways to do that, if you're not already in contact with him, is to reach out to him via the North Fork Mono Facebook page. That's a good way to connect with him. Ron, is there any other way to connect with you that you'd like to share?
You can give them my email.
Absolutely. So I will be sending out a post-program email either end of this week or beginning of next week, depending on how fires are going up here and where I'm at. So I will get that out to everybody shortly with the emails you provided in your registration, and I will share Ron's email there as well. So if you have any remaining questions, please reach out to him as he has asked you to do so. And yeah, we'll also provide some useful resources. So I think that's everything. Ron, do you have anything else you want to share?
Thank you. Appreciate you guys. You guys are doing a wonderful job. Keep it up.
Awesome. I wanted to give a big shout out to Jason Bayless. He has been running our logistics all evening. Thank you so much, Jason, for your hard work. Thank you, Tacey Crocker, for leading the Rights of Mother Earth Task Force. And thank you, Taylor, for bringing this presentation together with the Rights of Mother Earth Task Force via the Redbud Resource Group.
And Jason did a wonderful job. I'm always a little nervous when somebody else has got my program.
Thank you, Stephanie, for doing all the awesome MC work on this. You did amazing. Much love to everyone. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you. Nice meeting you.